So, good afternoon and welcome to this A2EP webinar going through the Australian Government 2024-25 budget review and also taking a trip down an investigation into climate-related financial disclosures. My name is Jared Leake and I'm the CEO of the Australian Alliance for Energy Productivity. And I'd like to commence this webinar with an acknowledgement of country, and that we here as all acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community, and pay our respects to their elders. This webinar is brought to you today by our lovely presenters and our fabulous members. These are some of A2EP's members who share the vision of improving energy productivity within Australia to help decarbonise our world. So big thanks to our members for their support. A little bit of housekeeping. So this will be recorded today and the slides will be sent over to you somewhere in the next week or so. We're absolutely planning on taking questions, and we've got a fabulous panel here to take any of those questions. So please get them ready. Just type that into the Q&A box down the bottom. Or raise your hand. We'll be able to take you off mute, or feel free to have a little bit of a sidebar chat using the chat function. So joining me today, I've got a co-host in Jacob Elkhishin, and we have two presenters for you, Liz Perrone and Lisa Zembrodt from Schneider Electric. And but first of all, first introduction here for you is Jacob Elkhishin. Jacob works with RSM and is a director there, looking at their risk advisory division, specialising in climate change sustainability services, based out of Brisbane. He's the national leader of resources, mining and energy and sustainability, and also global chair of ESG and climate services, with over 18 years of experience and lots of broad experience across lots of industry. Jacob, welcome and thank you for joining me to co-host today.
Thanks very much, Jared, and great to be here. So I look forward to the conversation today. Very, very important topic.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Our first speaker today, we're going to get into the budget, is Liz Perrone. But before I do that, I just want to have a quick acknowledgement of the National Energy Efficiency Conference that was held last week. And Lisa, I know you were there, and the Industrial Decarb Summit, just to congratulate the Energy Efficiency Council on that fabulous conference last week, bringing together, it must have been 200 or 300 passionate energy professionals to have some fantastic networking and discussions, and congratulations to the team at EEC for that wonderful conference. First speaker today, we're going to dive into the budget. And to do so, we've invited Liz Perrone who's the head of Energy Hubs and Commercial Development at AGL. Liz comes to us with over 20 years experience looking at various commercial arrangements within AGL, and leads the Energy Hub Commercial Development team. And so this is focused on identifying those opportunities for transitioning of AGL's coal assets into low carbon industrial energy hubs. What a incredibly important piece of work that you're doing there, Liz. Well done. Liz is not all she's done. She's worked on this an MOU with SunDrive Solar, which is sort of our solar PV hopeful within Australia, and certainly helped propel this solar sunshot program that's got some excellent funding just recently. Liz, I'll get you to share your screen and take us and run us through the budget that came out. Was it last week or so? Let's have a look at the highlights and dissect this and work out where the opportunities lay for us in the energy industry. Liz, I'll get you to share and away we go.
Thanks, Jared. Just to check that the share came through okay.
We're not in presentation mode at the moment, but
okay,
let's see how that goes.
Let's try that one more time. Is that better?
Yeah, we're in business. Over to you,
Great,
Liz.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Jared, for that warm welcome. Really pleased to be here this afternoon. So in my current role, I feel very privileged to be leading a team that's actually transforming these AGL's retiring thermal generation sites. We have three, one in the Latrobe Valley in Victoria, one in the Hunter Valley in New South Wales, and one at Torrens Island in South Australia. Put simply, that really means we're looking to reuse the land and the infrastructure at the sites to facilitate new industries, to create new jobs, and to support commercialisation of new technologies. So it's fair to say that I was very pleased and excited to hear the Future Made in Australia policy announced, and I could really see a pathway from policy to delivery on this one. More broadly, thinking about the budget, you know, I think that the budget is really about transition, and you can see that coming through at multiple levels. And when I mean, you know, when I say transition, it's not just about building generation and storage. It's about ensuring that the regions that have supported us for many years are not left behind. And the budget recognises that we need to do things differently, and that we need a degree of, you know, economic and policy support to facilitate that. So let's get into the Future Made in Australia policy. Has that moved forward on the screen?
Sure has. Yep,
Great, wonderful. So the headline here is $22.7 billion over the next decade to be invested in this Future Made in Australia. This is to be legislated, and the legislation will outline or include a very detailed national interest framework. And really, it's broken into two key streams. The first one is net zero transformation. So this is really targeted at the hard to abate industries. It's about leveraging our natural resources such as water and land and low cost renewable energy, and to create industries in and around hydrogen, green metals, low carbon liquid fuels such as sustainable aviation fuel and diesel fuels for the mining and other sectors. On the other hand, we have the economic security and resilience stream, and that's really about supply chains. So if we think about, in particular, batteries and solar panels, where we are very heavily reliant on imports of those technologies and many emerging technologies, this is about onshoring and creating those supply chains and the critical minerals extraction and processing that goes, you know, that goes with those industries. Sorry, seems to be a bit of a lag with the slides. Has that moved forward?
No, I haven't moved forward on this occasion.
No. Oh,
there we go.
No, we've gone through too.
There it is.
All right. Yeah. So how will this all happen? Well, it's fair to say that there was a lot in this budget, and there's a lot of detail to be worked through, but four key bodies will play a really pivotal role in this. And if we think about ARENA, so ARENA's role will continue to be very large in this area, and there are a number of programs that they're looking at. If we think about the Hydrogen Head Start, so $2 billion for round 2 of the Hydrogen Head Start was announced. What we know with round 1, there was very limited sort of restriction on criteria for eligibility. It's conceivable that in this next round there could be more narrowing of that criteria to really focus efforts in those priority areas that we just talked through, particularly around sort of sustainable aviation fuels or liquid fuels and mining applications and potentially also export as well, but that remains to be seen. The form of the funding, so much of this funding will be made available via, or economic support will be made available via either production credits or tax production tax credits, and it will come over a number of years. So I think with the hydrogen one, that's due to start in about 26, 27, and will go for 10 years. So it's really incumbent upon industry to make those sort of initial headways, build those business cases, develop these businesses with the support of the government sort of over the sort of mid to long term via those funding credits. There will be some upfront funding available. There is a $1.7 billion Future Made in Australia Innovation Fund. We've also got $500 million for the Battery Breakthrough Program. and also the Solar Sunshot program, which was announced in March, actually at AGL's former Liddell Power Station in at the Hunter Hub. So consultation for that program has already commenced with ARENA to provide further detail as to how that program will be rolled out. But once again, there is a production credit expected for that program. On the Net Zero Economy Agency, there's $400 million allocated to that department. And this department is really looking at skills and industry in the community. So what investment is required in training, reskilling, new innovation centres and the like. So that's quite exciting. And I expect that there'll be a number of that fund, or much of that funding directed into regional areas. In terms of actual financing support, so many of us will be familiar with the CEFC. It's been around for many years. It continues with its large remit around rewiring the nation and the Powering Australia Technology Fund. It is now paired with the National Reconstruction Fund. So the NRF was established in 2023. It is almost like the manufacturing type equivalent of the CEFC. So the CEFC is largely focused on energy investments, whereas the NRF has a broader remit, and they have a number of priority areas, including transport and manufacturing, but not necessarily limited to just transport, manufacturing and renewable energy. Their remit also includes things like medical, agriculture and the like. So I expect that those two organisations will be very key to providing the financing for these future projects. They're very much geared towards a co-financing structure, so I would expect obviously some private sector investment in there as well to complement the funding that might be available at federal and state level.
Yeah. Liz, I understand this is on top of, you've still got things running like the Powering the Regions Fund and what have you. So this is, I guess they're just saying nothing's changed with those. These are just the extra things for this next budget, yeah?
Correct. There are still both sort of state and federal grant funding opportunities available. And so, there are a number around sort of regional, focused on regions. There are some around sort of net zero manufacturing. There are also others that sort of focus on construction, building materials, recycling, that sort of thing. So there are quite a few out there to support this this net zero transition. Has that moved forward now to the next slide?
Yep, sure has.
Great. So this is a little bit of an overview of the solar PV industry and the particular parts of the supply chain there. So you can see through the production process, there are really 4 key stages: the polysilicon production, and then the ingot and wafer production, then into a solar cell and a solar module, before you sort of look at end of life materials recovery and recycling. Now, solar cell creation and solar module manufacturing is something that we are already doing in Australia, and we are very well positioned to expand upon. If we think about solar cells, I think in your introduction, Jared, you highlighted our partnership with SunDrive. SunDrive is an organisation that have developed some very innovative technology that uses copper instead of silver on their solar cell, and that creates a very efficient cell that leverages a product being copper that's more abundant than silver and lower cost and lower emission to produce. So some really positives to that technology. They have a pilot facility up and running at the moment at Cornell in Sydney, and are looking to establish their full size commercial size plant. We then have Tindo and 5B, who have already established module manufacturing capability in Australia. So very much we can see that the funding and policy support around these two parts of the supply chain, and ARENA certainly prioritise those in the first funding round for the Solar Sunshot program. That said, over time, it makes sense that once you've established the sort of the tail end of the supply chain, makes absolute sense to consider, can we vertically integrate backward? And if you think about polysilicon, for example, very, very energy intensive application that requires, quite a significant dollar investment, capex investment up front. But there is no reason why that couldn't be considered for Australia, leveraging potentially, connecting the hydrogen supply into that process to create a circular economy and have the full supply chain over the years build out. So that's something that we're watching very closely. Okay, moving forward more generally to the budget and some of the energy elements. I mean, there was a lot in this budget. I think it's very difficult to look at one thing in isolation, but it's pleasing to see that a range of different initiatives were considered in different areas. So if we think about...
Sorry to interrupt you, Liz. That one didn't go forward this time.
That didn't go forward.
Yep.
Let's try that.
Flying
Here we go.
There we go.
I think it's moving 2 screens. Thanks for that, Jared. Yeah, so great to see that, a lot of focus across many different areas and, some consideration as to how things will work together. So, on the sort of consumer side, we've got $3.5 billion energy bill relief. AGL's very supportive of that. That complements the substantial funds that AGL makes available to supporting customers that are experiencing financial hardship. We also see a number of other reforms that will help customers choose the lowest cost energy supply and support them in sort of electrification and innovation and adoption of new technologies. So that's very positive. On the generation and infrastructure side, Snowy 2.0 is obviously a very big mega project, which will provide dispatchable capacity into the system. So there's continued funding for that. Obviously, we've talked about the National Hydrogen incentive there, but that's $17 million for the hydrogen strategy, and then about $6.7 billion for the production tax credits, which will come in the form of a $2 per kilogram tax incentive subsidy. And then on the capacity investment scheme, there's about $65 billion allocated for that. And to the best of our understanding, that is really the cost of providing the price moderation, which is essentially the ceiling and the floor price that will apply under these future contracts to support and underpin investment in new renewables. What's pleasing to see that this has been a focus for the government. There are still some elements that need to be continue to be considered and pursued, so things that will help accelerate the development of this new generation, things like more efficient planning and approvals processes. So it's very positive to see in the next column $96.6 million for the nature positive plan that should help to address that. Of course, more focus and attention needed on how to reduce the connection timeframe for new projects, which at this point is still sort of lingering around that three-year mark, which is quite lengthy. In terms of environment, it's also interesting to see, $63.8 million assigned or allocated for reducing emissions in agriculture. That is obviously also another big area of opportunity to reduce our emissions. And then finally, which ties in very well to some of the opening comments, we've got $48 million to improve job opportunities and First Nations participation in carbon credit projects, which is very positive. We've got $134 million for employment support, and then sort of expanded eligibility for a new apprenticeships program. So once again, bringing together the sort of transition of the sort of targets around the net zero, supply chains, consumers, wholesale, large-scale generation and infrastructure, environment and jobs. And moving to the final slide. Hopefully that's clicked through now. Just to highlight once again the three AGL's three energy hubs, and the concept here of bringing together industry, renewable energy to create jobs, and to support decarbonisation of supply chains. And the other thing here is there's a potential here to co-locate and facilitate the co-location of some really complementary industries to build out a circular economy. Circular economy is great because it means you've got a really efficient use of resources, potential use of waste streams from one entity into, or one facility into another, reduces transport costs and associated emissions potentially by creating an ecosystem in the one location, as well as where possible reusing infrastructure on site, such as water infrastructure and electricity infrastructure and transmission infrastructure, which is very key as well. So, in closing, different people have different views about the policy announcements, particularly around the future made in Australia. What is clear is that the transition is an enormous undertaking. We need to continue to explore ways to support the transition, not just of the energy industry and infrastructure, but also of the economies and the regions. And so with that said, I will wrap up unless there are any questions, Jared.
Yeah, thanks very much, Liz. And we do encourage you, if you've got a question, please just type that in for Liz. Jacob, any reflections or comments there? What's happening with this budget?
Yeah, no, thanks, Jared, and great presentation, Liz. I had a couple of questions actually, and more around. It's clear to see in this budget that there is a focus on innovation, technology, and that investment, and there is allocation to. I think when you had your energy overview slide to generation and infrastructure, I think the discussion over the past 24 months or even longer have been on firm electricity supply and dispatchable generation. I guess, do you have any viewpoints in terms of, I guess, the pace? Will this help the pace of change? I know there needs to be, that the technology needs to be there as far as storage and things like that, but are we trending towards the right direction? Because I do see that there's more funding allocated this year as opposed to previous years of budgets.
I mean, it's a great question, and I know that's a cliche comment. Will it improve things? Well, certainly the things around like the nature positive plan, anything that can help expedite or not expedite, but make efficient these processes will help. In terms of, speaking around the New South Wales area, for example, the New South Wales Department of Planning has come up with a mechanism or a process to, and this is more around the sort of rezoning of sites to facilitate industry. That's a sort of first in class, and it's very helpful for not just for AGL, but others who are operating in the region, sort of at reaching a sort of end of life of their assets. So, to the extent that we can continue to explore ways of, bringing in policies and mechanisms to make these processes faster, that's definitely supported. I think, supply chain resilience is going to be another big one. We're still seeing sort of long lead times on some key equipment. The only way really to address that is for, the global economy to sort of step up, and we're seeing that around the world. But, I'd like to think that a combination of all these things, I think reskilling is a big one as well. It's one thing to have your kit ready to go. It's another thing to have, electricians and skilled people out there ready to install the equipment that's needed, whether it's transmission or generation or, downstream user equipment. So I would like to think so, but, I think we can do more.
Yeah, I agree. And I think the other question I had was with the funding, that it's stimulating, it's bringing out opportunities for those that do invest in technology, that those that are looking for ways to improve. make things more efficient. So for those that are, I guess, on the call, on the webinar, it's a lot of there's a lot of opportunities out there through grants, and not just federal. I think you mentioned there's state-based as well, and the funding is finite, so it's sort of generally first in, best dressed. So it's an opportunity there to capitalize on.
Most definitely, most definitely.
Indeed. Why don't we take a question from the audience there? Question here from Tom. Are there any hints that critical mineral processing will be low emissions, or is it just about supply chain?
I think that I think when you look at the two together, most definitely there is, with the funding around the low carbon liquid fuels, that could most definitely be seen as a nice pairing with sort of lowering emissions in the mining sector. So again, you can see comprehensively, you need to look at the different budget elements and how they work together.
And I think that will be caught by the next presentation that Lisa's going to do on the climate reporting side. So there will be transparency on those critical mineral producers in terms of what the carbon attachment is to their process. But at the moment, it's forecasting the supply or the demand that's going to be required to aid this transition and this transformation.
And that the critical minerals is another one that attracts essentially like a production tax credit, and I think from memory it's about 10% of processing costs, again starting from 26, 27 and running for about 10 years. So you can see that heavy industry really leveraging those big investments, leveraging those production tax credits as the form of incentive.
Yeah, and avoiding costs from the safeguard mechanism that are coming their way.
Exactly. And from our usual outreach and discussions, most of them haven't been looking at hydrogen, but this $2 a kilo production tax incentive, where I guess that, as I understand, that's going to sort of effectively put a ceiling on the hydrogen cost at about $2 a kilo, which is close enough to $20 a gigajoule, so that people will actually be able to lock in contracts at that level. Is that, am I understanding right there, Liz?
I'm not overly familiar with how the mechanism will work in practice. I think that detail is still being worked through.
Certainly at least at $2, then you're likely to get a lot more people interested there, and yeah, no doubt likely play into some of the processing for critical minerals as well.
And again, scale, obviously the bigger scale, the more the more facilities, the more scale, the more the greater the benefit there and the lower the cost. Yeah,
certainly that's where the hubs will no doubt come in as well. A question here from Rodrigo. Are there any details on what the emission reductions in agriculture might look like?
Not that I can comment on at this stage, but I can see if we can find some more. There was quite a bit of detail available in some of the paperwork, but not that I have to hand.
Yeah, and I guess just from an agriculture perspective, maybe budget aside, that there is going to be influence through the value chain again as Lisa begins her presentation around the climate related financial disclosures and the impact that it'll have on that value chain. So if you're in the agriculture sector and your customers are the Coles or the Woolies, there's potential impacts there and a driver there.
Yeah, and a few other pieces coming together, possibly around what's happening with renewable diesel and the investments likely to happen in WA there, where we stop exporting our own vegetable oils and things for others to make renewable diesel, and we actually start doing that ourselves. The other one is I know that AgriFutures is working on trying to develop a series of hubs that may be a hydrogen or ammonia type centre as well. So I assume that some of that money will flow towards further development of those sorts of projects. That would be my assumption there. Why don't I go to another question here from Alan? To what extent might the safeguard mechanism influence mining and other big industries to shift to energy efficiency or renewable energy so they can create and trade offsets and amplify budget signals? Who's on that one?
Do you mind if I take
please.
a with this? Yeah, so I was at Energy Mines in Perth a couple weeks ago, and this was a massive topic, energy efficiency and renewables both, and also fleet electrification was another critical topic that was talked about quite a bit alongside skills and upskilling workforces to be able to drive forward mining decarbonization. Energy efficiency is very well recognized as something that needs to be rolled out even further. There are obviously some mine specific, every mine has its own individual set of processes, and whether you're on grid or off grid makes a big difference in how you address renewables. So there's quite some complications in the mining segment that we don't necessarily see, in buildings or commercial buildings. But there is a very good recognition, at least from what I observed in that sector of our economy, that energy efficiency and renewables and fleet electrification are critical to decarbonization of scope 1 and 2.
Gotcha.
And
thank you.
I might just add to that, Jared and Lisa. So, I guess at the moment, most mines that are triggered as a safeguard facility are in process of submitting their emissions intensity determination to provide that sort of that baseline. So the process is beginning now. So once that's set, it should drive, if it hasn't already, action in terms of energy efficiency and emissions reduction. I do lead the sector for RSM here in Australia, and most of my clients are well and truly through implementation of some of those initiatives at the moment. Obviously, electrification, as Lisa mentioned, is the tough one because the tech is still not there yet for some of the heavy infrastructure assets, but where it is driving a lot of action, and then the ability to trade safeguard mechanism credits at some point.
Indeed. And on that energy efficiency, I think it was fairly notable. It was non-existent in this budget, but I understand with this recent sort of startup of the National Energy Performance Strategy and the net zero sector plans being done federally, I understand that they're just holding back a little bit to see how those plans pan out before they pile in a little bit more for things like renewable heat and more energy efficiency. So I think I've been told to watch this space, so just hold on there for the moment, which we can do. It looks like we've been given some homework here, and thank you so much, Matt. Some clarification on the $2 per kilo H2 by email, and yes, we'll look to see what we can find out there, Matt, because it's a bit of a game changer from what most people have been quoting and talking about. $8-10 a gigajoule over the last few years. That gigajoule kilo rather, so 80 or more than 80 or $100 a gigajoule, which is of not too much interest to many people. And so at $2, this may come on the radar. So yeah, let's do a bit of a investigation there. Let me squeeze in one more question for Liz before we get started on CRFD, and that was, Liz, are you able to talk a little bit more about the support for SunDrive startup and both AGL and government and any specific tax credit or PPA support?
Yeah, so our partnership with SunDrive really is around developing the site first and foremost, and assessing the feasibility and the technical parameters around constructing the SunDrive facility at the Hunter Hub. There's an element there, as AGL is the biggest solar installer in the country and have a very big distribution business and installation business within the C&I space, that we can also support their sort of channel to market, and that's good for SunDrive, it's good for AGL, and at the end of the day, it's good for customers as well. So we're very focused on that element as well. And then, in terms of discussions with government, there's a lot of planning that needs to go into the site redevelopment from a land and infrastructure perspective. So we're in close contact around those plans. We've got sort of a rezoning initiative underway and broader discussions in train. So, that is one opportunity that we have active at the hub. We also have another MOU with another organisation called Renewable Metals, and they are a battery recycling organisation. They have a pilot facility over in Perth. And New Rock, another organisation that's looking at using our waste coal ash stream and producing construction bricks and materials from the waste coal ash. So, you know, we've got a number of others that are not publicly announced as yet, but certainly we can see a very promising future for the site, and you know, slowly seeing these circular economies built out.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that summary and update there, Liz. An update every quarter would be nice, how these things are going. But great to see AGL right in the thick of things, and thank you so much for your presentation. Let's get on to CRFD, climate-related financial disclosures now. And this one is ramping up and getting onto the radar. And so we thought, let's bring in one of the experts in this area. Lisa Zembrodt from Schneider Electric is the principal and senior director of their sustainability business, covering Pacific zones there. And Schneider, if you know anything, this is all about digital transformation, energy management, and automation. I couldn't think of three better things to kick off a transformation. Lisa has over 20 years experience in this industry, or nearly rather, and works as a certified energy risk professional, as well as sustainability and climate risk certifications. So with that and everything that Schneider gets into in terms of PPAs and being the biggest in the world to do with that, and noting also that Lisa is on the board and treasurer for the Energy Users Association of Australia, and on the board for A2EP. It's absolutely wonderful to have Lisa here take us through climate-related financial disclosures. Over to you. We can see your slides, so away we
Thanks,
went.
Jared. Thanks for clarifying that it's not quite 20 years. Don't make me older than I already am, but yeah, thanks. I'm super excited to talk to you about this topic that's, you know, possibly a bit misunderstood as being a pretty boring topic. You know, mandatory climate-related financial disclosures doesn't necessarily get the blood going, but before I get into it, I do want to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands that I'm standing on, which is the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. I also need to remind everyone that this is not financial advice. As an energy nerd for almost 2 decades, I can absolutely understand how climate-related financial disclosures can get a label as being potentially a bit dry. But I hope by the end of this that you will be as excited about it as I am. I'm going to go through the who, the what, the why, and the so what today. I will make this deck available to you, as Jared has mentioned. There's a lot of slides that I'm flipped right past. I do encourage you to read them afterwards, or share them with folks in your organization that find this incredibly riveting, and reach out with any questions that you might have once you've had a chance to do that. And at the end, I will have 3 trivia questions because, you know, who doesn't love a little bit of trivia? I must, of course, start with 15 seconds on Schneider Electric. Jared has done that for me. So you know us very well. We're a 30 billion euro company focused on the software and physical technology to enable the energy transition. But what you might not know is that inside Schneider Electric, there's an almost 30-year-old business that has always focused on energy and sustainability services. We were actually acquired by Schneider Electric about 15 years ago. We serve about 40% of the world's Fortune 500 companies, and we assist them with sustainability strategies and baselining and ESG reporting and implementation of those strategies. Look, the last thing that I would mention on this bit is that we actually, as a very large company, are well decorated for our sustainability efforts. And my little division has been providing services to Schneider Electric to contribute to that outcome, which makes us very proud. So where did the standards come from? Did the Australian Accounting Standards Board just whip them up from scratch? No, they came from the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, which you might have heard of in TCFD. So the TCFD was established in 2015. It's voluntary, and about 75% of the ASX 200 have committed or are already reporting under that voluntary framework. So many people will already be familiar with the elements of the climate-related financial disclosures, which from here I will say CRFD to save us that extra 10 seconds. The TCFD influenced the International Sustainability Standard Board's standards, and those were adopted by the Australian Accounting Standards Board. and are now essentially the Australian Sustainability Reporting Standards. So you can see how the TCFD is now essentially what we've adopted under the CRFD. So there's essentially 4 pillars, if you will, for the CRFD. So there's the governance, which is related entirely to the governance around climate-related financial risks and opportunities. Then there's the risk management. So how are you identifying and measuring those risks, the strategy? How are you dealing with those risks, and the metrics and targets? So what are the metrics and targets that you have in place to assess your progress against these climate risks and opportunities? And on this slide, you can see how the elements sort of fit together within each other. And I will talk a little bit more about those on the next slide as well. Okay, so who needs to report and when? So it is a phased approach. It's based on size, and you can use this table here to get a sense of which group you sit in based on meeting 2 of the 3 criteria on this slide. Group 1, the largest entities, first cab off the rank. In the draft legislation, they're expected to start reporting from January 1st, 2025. Now, this is 6 months later than the original proposals. However, don't think that you can sit on your heels and wait a little bit longer, because actually we need that extra 6 months. It's really critical to making sure that everyone's ready by the time the disclosures start, especially those who haven't already started or who aren't already reporting in a TCFD type framework. So the next really exciting thing to understand is, what do you need to disclose? Do keep in mind that the final legislation is not yet released, so these may change. This is based on the draft legislation. This is for a Group 1 entity, and there's a lot. So I'll quickly go through the list of what needs to be disclosed. Obviously, there's the governance that I mentioned before. Again, all the governance processes around who owns the climate-related risks and opportunities. Then there's the strategy. So the climate risks and opportunities mapping, you need to disclose a transition plan, and you need to disclose qualitative and quantitative climate scenarios, and 2 of each of these. So one aligned with a 1.5 degree world and one of your choosing. You also need to disclose your risk management policies. Again, how are you identifying, how are you measuring those risks? And I'm sure there's a lot of people in the room who own the Scope 1 and 2 emissions, but you need to disclose Scope 1 emissions, Scope 2 emissions, Scope 3 emissions, and the metrics and targets related to those. Now, you can see in this table, for example, there are some things that are not necessarily, at least in the draft legislation, required, but rather recommended in the first year. So Scope 3 is an example of that. But Scope 3 becomes mandatory in the second year. So get your skates on, because you need to disclose it. And this comes back to what we were talking about earlier, when Jacob was mentioning the impact on the value chain and how that disclosure is going to drive some action. The other thing I wanted to note, especially for those in the room who own Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions, so not only are those emissions being disclosed, as I mentioned, but the metrics that you have as well. So if you're not doing much to reduce your Scope 1 and 2 emissions, but your competitor, George Jetson down the street, is, well, this is absolutely going to have an impact on how you're viewed by investors and customers and other stakeholders, because now we've got this very clear ability to compare apples to apples. So hopefully you're starting to see a little bit now how the legislation is going to drive action and impact. But the other important thing to note is that these disclosures must be audited, and the level of assurance is expected to increase through time. And this is where our friends at RSM come in for sure. There's a lot of work that needs to be done by the auditors, and the easier you can make it for them, surely the better. But you do need to keep in mind that this isn't just data you can throw into a report and it can be inaccurate. It must be audited. Okay, so what? Look, the mandatory reporting is a massive driver for market change, like significant market change, because explicitly understanding and acting on the understanding of the connection between the management of climate risks and value creation is incredibly powerful. So the mandatory reporting is so much more than just putting data into a report, right? It's about understanding the impact that climate has on an organization and its market, its supply chain. It's about understanding the financial impact of all of these elements and putting in place a plan to mitigate those risks and to take advantage of the opportunities and to adapt to the changing environment. So as one example of this slide that's bringing together these elements, you will have to disclose a transition plan. Lots of entities today don't have a transition plan. So simply by requiring a transition plan to be created so that it can be disclosed, the CRFD essentially encourages or almost forces actions to be taken, because in a transition plan, you'll end up with investment plans, you'll have ideas and very clear roadmaps for what you're going to do. And once you're actually starting to take action, this is going to improve social license to operate. It will improve your CapEx and OpEx strategies and a whole number of fantastic benefits. To that point, actually, this slide is all about explicitly connecting how climate-related risks and opportunities affect the financial outcome of an organization. As I work in this space every day, and I feel like, oh, everybody knows this, but it's so clear that some of these things still feel a little bit abstract. So I'll give a couple examples, and some of them are a little bit easier to understand. So take a storm, for example, right? So a storm that was made worse by climate change sweeps through and damages your facility. This is a very clear impact on your financial outcomes on an acute basis. But we also know that those storms are now considered to be more likely, more frequent, so your insurance costs go up. Now you have a very clear chronic impact on your financial outcomes. Let's say in that agricultural sector example, or others, installing things on roofs. Let's say you've got people who are working outside in your supply chain and they can't because it's too hot. One more that I find pretty concrete. Let's say that you've got assets that are not quite compatible with a low carbon economy. The value of those assets will decline much quicker than otherwise. And they may even become what we call stranded assets. Now your company is worth less because your assets are worth less. So you can see how all of these have a very clear connection to financial outcomes. So that clear and direct effect of climate on a company's ability to sustain its financial performance is absolutely reason enough to take action. But by making all of those connections explicit, giving transparency, to use Jacob's very fantastic word, disclosing them for the whole world to see, we make action not only more likely, but more urgent because it becomes a competitive advantage. And this is the so what. I have a few very quick final points, because surely by now you see you have to do something, but you should do something. So first, here's our view on what businesses need to do to prepare. Okay, there's a lot, right? But there's a couple that are really critical to get started. Mobilizing internally and assessing are those critical first steps. And I would say, look, your attendance here is a great first step towards mobilization. I am going to skip past the next few slides. They've got some great details on our general recommended approach on the 4 pillars that we talked about earlier under the TCFD. This is general, a discussion is warranted, but have a read through afterwards and reach out with any questions. I did want to pause very briefly on this slide because I do think this is another one that you should read through later. We've added into this the common challenges that we're seeing with customers already in helping them to get ready for CRFD. And we've added the management strategies to overcome those very common challenges. And look, hopefully it will make your journey just that little bit easier by sharing these. Investment, getting ready for that investment and what this is going to cost, and collecting data via a robust system are 2 that I'll point out. It's also really important to note that Australia is not alone in what we are doing. There are mandatory standards popping up all over the world. I am happy to say that the Australian Accounting Standards Board, having adopted the TCFD, makes it a lot easier because now we can easily compare a company in Australia versus a company in the EU versus a company in Asia, which is fantastic for transparency and understanding the value of these organizations. Of course, we can support you, but one of the key takeaways, and this is probably one of my most important, is we recommend that you start with a gap assessment as soon as possible. It's a relatively small piece of work, but it will put you on the right path for the entire journey. And that is critical to get started now. So finally, some really quick trivia. So the first question is, the ASIC chair said during his keynote, at the Deakin Law School last month that the time to start is, I'm sure you won't be surprised, now. Well, actually he said today, but that was a month ago, so seriously now. The next question is, as published in the Treasury's policy impact statement, what are the estimated costs of implementation? Well, it's a lot. So ongoing costs across just the Group 1 entities is 950 million for essentially those transition costs and 520 million in ongoing costs. So like I said before, start to mobilize an understanding of what those additional costs might be to implement CRFD. Now, what are the benefits? There are so many, but I chose just a few. Certainly lower cost of capital, improved international capital flows, and assuming that you're taking action, you should see reduced social license risk, reduced transition risks, and overall improved economic outcome. And a bonus question, what's the recommended first step? Hopefully you've all got that question right, a gap assessment. So Jared, I will leave it there, but as I said before, I'm happy to make these slides available for folks to read through later and answer any questions that folks have either now or later as well.
Lisa, thank you so much. What a great way to get a feel for really why this is important and to act and get into it. So that's excellent. Just invite Jacob. Jacob, any comments, reflections on that materials and what's happening with CRFD?
No, I guess the only thing I say is I echo everything Lisa said, and definitely consistent with what I'm telling all of my clients, anyone I meet, even if you're Group 3. And I disagree with the ASIC. I feel like you should have started a year ago, because it can be an intensive process, and you know, even just discussing the extent of Scope 3, even that alone, you're looking at 12 to 24 months of efforts just to get that in order and then get that auditable. So I won't take. I'll leave the questions to. I think that there's a few questions in the Q&A box. I might let the attendees go through those questions.
Sounds good, yeah, Jacob. And mentioning on Scope 3, we've got that question there from Alan, and if I add to that a bit to say this, it feels like this could be a really good enabler for looking at value chain assessment. And as Alan mentioned in his question, he said that A2EP has done a fair bit in value chains and what have you, and this might really help this along. Lisa, any things how you see this playing out, given that many small businesses seem to have little grasp of the pressure they're about to face on this to cut their emissions and things?
Absolutely, and I can give you our experience of that. So we launched a supplier program. We decided that we would work with our top 1,000 suppliers, and we very quickly realized, wow, holy moly, we've got a really wide range of understanding of not only what emissions are, but how to baseline them, how to set targets, and then how to decarbonize. So essentially what we've done is created software to do that, and we've essentially made that open to the market as well. So software is going to be a critical way to address the supply chain, because you cannot do it manually. There are too many companies. It has to be done with software. So that's one of the ways that will play out. The other thing that comes to mind for me is that the companies that are the largest customers at the end of the supply chain, those are the ones that are going to drive action into the supply chain. And it will be through, yes, carrots, but probably also some sticks. And that responsibility on companies like ours, because we are so large, is unavoidable.
Gotcha, thank you. I feel like this is a bit of a $64 million question. Do we have enough trained people to manage reporting and auditing? And we assume some specific training is going to be required to really understand things behind the numbers and what have you. And do the training services exist?
Jacob has something to add there. There's really not. That's why we're all colleagues in this industry, because there is so much that needs to be done, and there's not enough of us. So we all need to be more digital in the way that we work, in the way that we collaborate with each other, to share learnings, to make sure that we are going to achieve this, because look, we all live on this one planet together, and we either make it or not. But Jacob, would you?
Yeah, I was just going to say, just to add to that, I think it's important to understand that it is going to be a journey, and the expectation that it's going to be 100% perfect day.1 is probably not realistic. And as time goes on, processes will become more improved, capabilities will build, and so on and so on. In terms of auditors, there is some greenhouse and energy auditing, so greenhouse gas emissions reporting through the ENGAs has been audited historically, and there is that knowledge there. So that was established since in 2011 when the carbon tax was in place. But in terms of businesses and organisations going through this process, there is going to be a learning curve, and it's going to be through doing and using experts and consultants to help through this process, but to transfer that knowledge and that education so that in year 2 you've got that capability. So it will be a journey.
Yeah, and maybe I'll add just one thing to that, because you've just reminded me, Jacob. There are civil penalties for not complying, but something that is embedded into the legislation is some protections almost, in terms of if you disclose something and you did your absolute best and it was not perfect, there are some protections around that are being baked in based on the feedback that has been provided. So that's something else that you'll want to keep an eye on, and that we can talk a bit more about once the legislation is final.
Yeah, and I think my usual viewpoint is, if you go into this with being as transparent as possible, you're on that right track. So it's all about transparency, not and again, transparently disclosing what you're doing, or transparently disclosing what you're not doing. Either way, it's going to be up to the stakeholders to decide on what they do with that information.
Good to know. And any talk about internal carbon pricing mandates? Is that looking to be incorporated at all?
Yeah, I'm not sure that it will be entirely met. An internal carbon price is a fantastic framework, though. If you're trying to assess how to spend your capital, then an internal carbon price is the absolute best way to do that. Actual value of individual projects that you're looking to stack up next to each other. So, I mean, Schneider Electric has had one for years and years and years, and we highly recommend it.
Gotcha. Thank you. Thank you. And certainly we've seen lots of examples, and it seems very common in Europe, where they start applying these internal carbon prices and then applying that to financial yardsticks for projects, and it has a good impact. And I hear numbers like usually often about $200 per ton is quite often used. So good. Here's a nice one from Alan, and this may be our last question. How do we deal with all this consultants costs? You're going to have a lot of small companies out there with smaller revenues, and this is going to be very hard for them to swallow. Maybe the larger ones in this first round, it'll be okay. But, I think this gets towards, that you're almost talking a smaller company when revenue is below 50 million. And if they find themselves with several $100,000 worth of consultant costs, this is going to hurt them, and maybe even affect driving real abatement. Lisa, any thoughts on how that can be managed?
Absolutely. My mom falls into this bucket, and she was actually one of the personas that I interviewed when I was developing software and helping our company to develop the software that works for the SMEs. And that was exactly the pain point, was how is someone who doesn't have budget for this or any knowledge going to do what they need to do? And again, it comes back to the scalability of software. You're not going to be able to have a small business, mom and pop cafe, have a consultant do this. That has to be done at the biggest companies that are the most complex, whereas a piece of software for a mom and pop shop is plenty in order to help someone of that size understand what can they do to decarbonize, what are their emissions. Because if you think about the materiality of a mom and pop, generally speaking, outside their scope 3, it's relatively simple compared to a complex operations like a miner or a manufacturer like we are.
And just to add to that, and the earlier you start, the better, because as you get closer to some of these dates, generally costs start to increase, demand starts to increase. So and then again, even with those systems and the technology, the data still needs to be in good quality, so there is efforts in that too. So I think that the messaging is that the earlier you start, then you can sort of try and manage that cost with the luxury of time, because that luxury is slowly dissipating.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. I've got to say, when Lisa first came to me with this, maybe 6 months ago, I was a little bit like, oh, this could be a bit dry.
Boring.
Yeah, but as soon as you bring it in to say, look, this is real, it's enabler, it'll help with action, it'll help understand value chain emissions and get cooperation going. This is actually a vehicle for good, and let's hope it goes that way. Lisa, thank you so much for your presentation today. And also then thank you to our other presenters. Let me just bring up my slide here. Liz Perrone from AGL, thank you so much for that budget review, really helpful. Although we've got a bit of homework to do. Let's see if we can get to the bottom of this H2 production tax incentive and get that out to everybody. Jacob, thank you so much for co-hosting. Pleasure to have you all here, and very good to have you. So
thanks, Jared. And I think you're sharing your presenter view at the moment.
Sorry, thanks very much for that. I'll change that over. Let me just see if I have another crack at that. I've just got one more thing to share with you before we go. Let's see if that one comes up better. That should be looking better. Okay. And then just to let you all know, we had a big shout out at the National Energy Conference last week about our site tours. We were very thankful for, I think it was Jane Butler from AGL, very happy at telling everybody to get on the on A2EP site tours. Well, we're excited to announce that we've got a whole series of them coming up. A short single one, ones with a couple of sites, and also ones with a couple of sites with networking afterwards. And so this is now available to book and to join up. Here's the first 4. We've got another 1 or 2 that's going to be added to this. So this is going to consume a fair bit of what we do through July and August. This is about getting people out to see the technology, feel it. We're very focused on getting trades on this journey. This is not just for the designer types. Let's also bring in the trade. So we're actually working with FMA and ERA on this one to bring in a broader audience on this. So if you go to our website and go to the events, this will come up, and you can select which tour you'd like to join for different technologies and what have you. So it's going to be a great little series coming up through July and August, and really hope you can join. So if you do want more of A2EP, hit A2EP on LinkedIn and hit follow. You'll see our news that comes up. So all that's left then now is to say thank you so much for joining us. It's been a pleasure bringing you to this webinar, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Thank you all.